What's up guys, Lockie here, and in this video I'm going to be teaching you the secret cheat code to getting rich without having to be smart. I was able to grow my business to $1 million a month by the age of 26, and by absolutely no means am I the sharpest tool in the shed. And I've never heard anyone discuss what I'm about to teach you here in this YouTube video. So strap in, grab a pen and a pad, because this is going to change your life and help you achieve things you never would have been able to achieve without understanding this. So without further ado, let's dive into my screen. So I actually learned what I'm about to teach you here through practice and through years of training people. I've never heard anyone talk about this on YouTube. So I think it's a really interesting concept, because after training, 20 really good salespeople, but I've coached almost 100 people over my career, I could predict who would win before they would even start, sometimes even in the interview. And it comes down to one thing nobody talks about, which is what I describe as your rate of learning. Okay. And both ends of the spectrum have traps involved, and you need to understand them. So I could predict how you'd perform before you even start. So in the interview, when I'm interviewing someone to hire them, and this is relevant whether you own a business or don't own a business, as long as you're ambitious and want to crush it, this is relevant for you. And I could identify what they'll struggle with and how I would have to actually coach them, which was really interesting. And I gave it the name of your rate of learning. Okay, so what is a rate of learning? Well, you were born with a rate of learning, okay? And if you don't know what your rate of learning is, you're going to be grinding your entire career completely blind. So years of fighting your weaknesses. However, if you're aware of what your rate of learning actually is, you can lean into your strengths, you can target your deficits, and you can do it with clarity and a lot less frustration, okay? So knowing your genetic strengths and weaknesses, and you can improve much faster with much less frustration than what you currently are right now. This is also essential if you ever want to own a company, lead a team, or hire, because you must be the most aware person in the entire building when it comes down to rate of learning. And this is something that's really important, is I don't want you to listen to this and try and self-select what you want to be. It's important that you identify what's true, because the accuracy, if you're a slow rate of learner or a fast rate of learner, is really important, and both of them have strengths and weaknesses. And when I'm talking about rate of learning, I'm not talking about book smarts. I'm talking about adaptability intelligence, okay, which is same situation, new outcome, meaning you actually learn. So rate of learning is how fast you improve at a skill, whether it be selling, running ads, building a business, anything. And I do like Hormozzi's definition, which is same situation, new outcome. How many reps before a new behavior shows up? It's the speed of the loop, not how many books you've read. So it doesn't matter if you pass a test and get a high IQ score. Sure, that has an indication that you're a higher rate of learner. However, it's really how fast you can learn something new and become proficient at it. So pay close attention, okay? Here is the spectrum, all right? Here's the spectrum. We have a slow rate of learner over here on the far left-hand side, and you can see I've got this little graph at the top as well as we go through. We have slow middle rate of learners, we have middle rate of learners, we have mid-fast, and we have fast. So you are genetically born somewhere on this sliding shades of gray, right? This is a continuum, not a box or a fixed position that you are in. And everyone sits somewhere on here, and neither end is inherently good or bad. Both have strong pros and strong cons. The only fatal position is having the downsides of your type of rate of learning without its upsides, because then you're useless at either end. So whenever I first say this to someone, everyone wants to be put in the fast rate of learning category, because you don't want to be categorized or labeled as a slow rate of learner, right? You don't be labeled as an idiot. However, the majority of people sit towards the slow end, and so do I. I was actually born, I believe, to be slow mid, and I've worked my way up over many years to become mid fast. However, you don't want to select where you want to be. It's about having the awareness of where you're at, because both of them have strong pros and cons. I'm about to go into fast rate of learning. Trust me, it's not all sunshine and rainbows over there. So first, we're going to talk specifically about the slow rate of learner. And this is probably the first time you've ever heard of this concept. So I'm going to take my time with this. I'm going to go through very specifically, because once you understand this, it will genuinely impact the way that you approach learning and developing for the rest of your life. And if you own a business, this is really, really critical leadership and training material, which I never heard anyone talk about, and I had to learn the hard way. So Let's talk about the slow learner, which is more common than you would think. So slow learners, it takes longer for things to click. They have weaker, complex problem solving skills, and common sense sometimes can be a little bit of a lag. Now, remember, this is shades of gray. It's not, are you a slow or a fast rate of learner? It's how slow or fast are you? So this takes a while for things to click, for things to just make sense, that others, it just makes sense to, because they have a lower raw processing power internally. You know, as a bit of a joke, this is kind of like when people say they wouldn't tie their shoelaces unless you reminded them, or they would have forgotten their head if it wasn't attached to their body. They need lots of reminders, and they need lots of reps for things that other people consider to be a little bit more common sense. And often these people are really great humans though. So they're very friendly, they're caring, they're usually brilliant culture fits in the company. This is about processing speed, not worth. So often these people, because they lack in intelligence in some ways around problem solving skills, they've made up for that by being really good people. And so often this can be the person in the company. It's like you really don't want to fire them to show up. They try really hard. They're such a nice person, but they're just not the best at their job. So I started here. I was slow to middle, in my opinion, when I first started. So slow, the strengths. So nothing came free, so they built everything else. So they typically have really, really good characteristics. Work ethic, student mindset, punctuality, repetition, empathy. So the default for a slow rate of learner is hard work and long hours. So they often show up early, they stay late, they study more, they try really hard. They usually have a really good student mindset. So they're really open to ideas and being wrong and trying new things and doing things your way. They're very humble, they're very coachable, and they have no ego around learning things and, you know, dotting the I's and crossing the T's and going through the process. If you show them what to do, they're very open and put their ego at the door to do it. They're also usually very punctual and prepared. So they often show up 10 to 15 minutes early. They have their notepad out, they have their pen ready, their laptops charged, and they're also very empathetic because they know what struggling feels like. So they're very understanding with others. And this is a really, really key strength to the slower rate of learner is they're kings of repetition. So they're very comfortable with reps that would bore everyone else to death. Now, obviously I'm talking very in absolutes here, but typically for yourself, for myself and other people, it's not like you tick every single one of these boxes, therefore you are a slow rate of learner. These are just characteristics. So you may be good at some of these things, you may be bad at some of these things and still be a slow rate of learner. You may be a middle rate of learner and be really good at some of these things, about some of these things. It's more of the concept that I want you to understand so you can identify where you are and then we can build on them using the tactics I'm about to give you here in a moment. Now, here is the trap for the slow rate of learner. So work harder works until it doesn't. So they kind of put this effort in, but then there's this line where the ceiling of harder and the income, just like working harder, working more hours, doesn't help them anymore. So their answer to every problem is more hours, less sleep, and going harder. And that's good until it maxes out, okay? So your income and your pay tracks with the complexity of the problems that you solve. And they stay stuck on repetitive required work, and they want the promotion because they work so hard, but they never actually graduate to high leverage problem solving skills. So the career killer here is the boss concludes they're a lovely person, but my coaching time gets no return. That's when promotions stop and the firing starts, and you don't want to blame anyone else. So the really good thing of a slow rate of learner is when you're not good at something or there's a problem, your natural bias, your natural default is to put in more hours, which is a great characteristic to have because you have a really strong work ethic and you have very good consistency. However, what happens when you hit like an income max or a promotion max if you work in a company or your business plateaus is you continually try to solve problems with more work, but eventually you do have to work smarter, not just harder. And that is something that you're typically not very good at. And I have coached and had many employees who are slower rate of learners. And often the slower rate of learners who get very frustrated with the income level, it's because they see themselves working hard, often working harder than other people, putting more time in than other people, being more consistent, and therefore they want to make more money and get promoted within the company. However, they simply cannot recognize that just because you work harder, it doesn't mean you're working on higher value things. Doesn't mean you deserve to make more money. Because often in life, I'm a big believer, you are currently getting exactly what you deserve. Okay, you're currently getting exactly what you deserve, and this can be a really frustrating problem or a plateau for a slow rate of learners because you're working harder, however your income is not going up because you have to transition from working harder to working smarter, and that is one of the challenges and difficulties. Okay, so now this is a really big problem that I'm going to go through very quickly here, which is if you have a slow rate of learning plus you have a victim mindset, like you're fully cooked and you're going to be stuck forever. And this is where a huge share of the population actually lives. People who are a slow rate of learners, but also have a victim mentality. A good example here is often, and I just know a lot of these people who work in trades. Like if you're a guy who works in a trade as a plumber, as a carpenter, maybe a truck driver, or maybe you work more as like a barista or you're a chef or whatever it is. And if you're a slow rate of learner and you blame other people for not getting the opportunities to improve in your life, you will be stuck forever and it's going to be a very frustrating, painful experience. It's totally okay to be a slow rate of learner, but you have to have, honestly, across the whole spectrum, just in life, you have to have very high accountability and personal responsibility for where you're at, because then you can own the results you're currently getting, say it's my fault, and then work on the solutions I'm about to go through to improve. But the vast majority of the population, they have a victim mindset here. So what is the fix? Okay, what's the challenge? What do you improve? Well, what I recommend for all stages, but specifically we'll talk about slow rate of learners here, is you need to max out your strengths, then learn how to actually learn. So number one, max out your strengths first. So you have to be really organized, have great punctuality, be very good at preparing for things, and have very high levels of consistency. Because if you can't max this stuff out first, like I said before, the most dangerous people, the people who I immediately fire, the people who are worthless from a valued perspective, specifically talking business and success and achievements, are people who have the downsides of their rate of learning, but also do not have the upsides. These are the people I pull the pin on quite quickly. So if you're not a high rate of learner and you can't pick up things really fast and you're incredibly intelligent, but then you also aren't organized and punctual and consistent and hardworking, then you're cooked. So you want to max out this first. Then the next thing is you want to learn how to actually learn. And this is very difficult because you weren't taught this, but I have a few videos on my channel about this and I'll give you some tips here. So you have to ask smarter questions. I just did a video on this, so you should go watch that. But this is really key. You need to take better notes and have better cheat sheets and material for how you actually document a process or a skill that you're currently learning. You really kind of want to have like what I refer to as like idiot-proof documentation and write down every single little micro step written down in a document. And if you're trying to specifically get a job or work at a company or work for a founder that you like, you need to have a research ed. So study the founder, study the offer, study the funnel. This is what I did when I got a job at an agency. I did a lot of research on the founder, on the agency before I got the job. So you can show up being more prepared than anyone else, and it's much more impressive. And then you also kind of want to keep visibly leveling up to whoever your boss or your manager is, so they consistently decide that you're a good investment of their time to be trained. So the waiter example. So here's a good example of how to actually learn better. So let's just say that you're a waiter, okay, and you have just gotten a job at a restaurant and you want to learn how to get better at learning, okay? So what you want to do is document every tiny step. So let's say that you have a manager and you have to kind of model them and you're watching them do the job and you want to get good really fast at it. What you want to do is write down every tiny little thing that they do so you can duplicate and replicate the pattern of success of a high rate of learner or someone who's doing a good job at that job without having to have yourself any common sense or have to magically have some genius intelligence and improvise doing it the right way, because you're genetically not wired to do that very well. So instead you want to use your other skill, which is attention to detail, repetition, grunt work, repetitive, boring grunt work, to navigate not being good at the other stuff. So for example, what way do they walk through the restaurant to get to the table? Like what's the route? When they get to the table, do they greet people by name? Do they say who they are? Then do they pull their pen out? Okay, then when they take the orders for the appetizers, do they write down the orders for the appetizers before they move to the mains? Or are they just getting the appetizers, the mains, desserts, and then writing it down after? Probably not. So you want to pay attention to all these tiny little things. Then once they write down the appetizers, then they move to the mains. Then they move to the desserts. Then maybe they do the drinks. And then they repeat the order to every single person to make sure they get it right before they leave the table. Do they ask if they want everything brought out at once or brought out sequentially? And you write down every single little thing that the person does, so there's no room left to need to be a genius, then you let your repetition superpower master and you repeat it again and again and again and again. You're not trying to wing it, okay? Interviews are your cheat code research. I kind of mentioned this. Fast learners never prepare. They just show up and wing it because they genetically can. However, for you, you want to over prepare for everything that you possibly can. If you have a sales call with a new potential client in a B2B space, you want to research their business thoroughly. What services do they do? How long have they been in business? Because genetically on the spot, you're not going to be as fast and as quick with things. You have a lot of processing power. So you want to do as much work in advance as possible. And this is you can climb the spectrum here. So I went from, I believe, slow mid to mid fast over about, it was probably more like 5 years. But then over the past 5 years, equaling 10 years, I've gotten significantly better. And people today would probably describe me as a fast rate of learner. However, it's only because I've been training on this for 10 years. And then you want to keep demonstrating the rising rate of learning so coaching you stays worth it. Alrighty, now we're going to transition speaking to more about the fast rate of learners. So the slow rate of learners, it's okay. You have many, many strong characteristics and strengths, but your weaknesses is you need to learn how to actually learn by breaking things down into tiny steps that are so simple, you can't possibly screw it up. Now, and by the way, fast rate of learners, that would also make things easier for you as well. It's kind of how you train people, is you make the steps so simple they can't screw anything up. Now, let's talk about fast rate of learners, but first the outliers. So there are exceptions among the exceptions. Fast rate of learners are exceptions by definition. However, there are ultra high and fast rate of learners, which are kind of beyond the scope of this video. And so these are people with ultra genius IQs. Often they're super autistic and have really high levels of ADHD, and they're typically world-class at one thing. So this is like the Mark Zuckerbergs, the Elon Musks, the elite surgeon types, the Steve Jobs. So they're phenomenal at one focused thing, but often they struggle everywhere else. They're genetic lottery winners in a way regarding specific intelligence, but we're not talking about these people. I want to talk more about like normal high rate of learners, but these are people like Elon Musk who will get 6 hours of sleep, 3 hours of sleep, run 13 different businesses and invent PayPal and invent SpaceX. Like these people are very, very rare. But often you wouldn't actually want to be them because socially they're usually extremely autistic, which is having autism and ADHD is not a bad thing. There's many strengths that come along with that, but they are very socially challenged and often very struggle to get along with people, struggle to make friends, struggle to have good social lives, and they feel a lot like outcasts. But they're often extremely good at one particular field, like they're a math genius or they're an astronomer genius or they're an elite level surgeon because they have such maniacal levels of focus on one thing. However, I want to talk at the more common fast rate of learner who is probably watching this video. So let's talk about who you are. You can get, this is the key defining characteristic, I refer to it as you can get 80% good at anything almost instantly. So it may take you weeks or months. You're typically the kid who got a B+ in school on tests without studying. You have a very high level of common sense, you have very strong pattern recognition skills, and you're often very quick with mental math. I know for sure I wasn't a high rate of learner because I hate doing math off the top of my head. And what takes a slow learner months of grinding, you can basically do that straight out of the gate, and you're naturally good at brain work. You've simply never really had to try that hard to do these things. So here are some of the strengths. So you're a manager's dream hire at first. So a slow rate of learner, I'm going to give a bit of an example down here in a moment. But first, you're right a lot. Okay, so you typically have very high levels of conviction, you have high levels of confidence, and you're very fast at making independent decisions, which is really great. My best salespeople, the best hires I've ever made, were always high rate of learners at first, because I can give them a few call recordings and they were just instantly at KPI. And then I could coach them on the advanced stuff, which is way more fun for me to talk about and way more exciting for me to talk about. And I had a way better ROI training a 7 into a 9 than a 6 into an 8. So it's kind of like you want to hire a 7 and turn them into a 9, or hire an 8 and turn them into a 9, rather than hiring a 4 or a 5 and turn them into a 6. It's way more effort for less return, which is basically the difference between hiring a slow rate of learner and a fast rate of learner. Another good thing here is if you drop one into a team of slow rate of learners, they will shatter the ceiling of what everyone believes is possible and reset the whole culture. So I have an experience with this. One of my top sales guys was more of a slower rate of learner. I spent months training them to get to a certain standard, and they kind of maxed out, and it was really hard to get the team to perform above a certain close rate, for example. But then I hired a really high rate of learner, actually. I put them in, practically didn't even train them, and within the first month, they beat the highest performer on the team who had spent 3 months diligently training. Now, again, they had some downsides, which we're about to go into. However, it massively shattered the standard of the team, and then everyone lifted, which was really good. One of the traits of high rate of learners, which is a pro and a con, is they refuse to do dumb repetitive work, so they fix the system instead. And problems just get solved because it just makes sense. So the example I'm going to give here is let's say 2 people work at McDonald's, okay? The slow rate of learner at McDonald's, when people are eating food at McDonald's, they leave their trays on their table, okay? The slow rate of learner will go around, collect the trays all day, clean them, and then bring them back to the counter again and again and again, all day, every day, with a smile on their face. They won't complain about it, and they'll just do it. However, the fast rate of learner will go around, pick up the trays, then they'll get pissed off and annoyed because the work is so, in their mind, dumb, repetitive, and boring. And so what they'll do is they'll fix it and they'll implement a system. For example, they'll put a sign up at the counter that says, please return your trays to the original counter. When they serve people and give them their food, they'll say, hey, can you please bring your tray back once you're done? And then people will start bringing their trays back. So they will actually proactively solve problems because for them, it makes sense, which is an absolute breath of fresh air as a founder, as a business owner, because when you hire these people in place, they take a lot of work off of your plate and things just start to magically get better and improve in the business, and things start to grow without you actively having to do more work. So they're extremely highly valuable people for a company, whereas slow rate of learners, they're great people, you love them, great culture fits, they do it with a smile on their face, they never talk back, they're never difficult to deal with. However, you're always having to force them to learn and force them to get better, and they don't rapidly improve anything in the business, and they'll just do the same thing again and again and again unless you actively coach them and tell them how to improve, which can be incredibly frustrating, especially if multiple times they run into the same problem. You think, why don't you just solve that? And the slow rate of learner gets frustrated because they think they should be making more money because they've been here for 2 years or 3 years, but they're not getting promotions and people around them are getting promotions. It's because they're not very valuable. They're just doing things that are repetitive again and again, and high rate of learners rapidly go past them. Okay, now here is the big trap. Like I said, it's not all sunshines and rainbows for the fast rate of learner. So this is the 80% trap, why they never master anything, okay? So for a high rate of learner, they go from 0% to 80% good based purely on genetics, almost like this. They almost don't even need to try, it just happens. But then to get from 80% good at something to 100% master at something, it requires these slow learner skills they never built. Boring repetition, taking very detailed and specific notes, documenting how the best person does something, long hours of diligent, focused work, not on the thing that they're genetically good at, but on the slow rate learning type skills, grinding on the fundamentals. And this is a huge downside to the fast rate of learners, okay? So fast rate of learners, I know you think you're all that, I know you think you're king shit, but please listen to this because this is gonna fuck you up for the rest of your life if you don't solve it, okay? Now, that work feels like dumb people work, okay? You may not say it, but I know that you think it feels like dumb people work because I've worked with many, many high rate of learners, and it feels boring, it feels beneath them. So at 80%, they get bored and they hop. They move to a new skill, they may move to a new offer, they may move to a new vertical, so they can get another 0 to 80% dopamine hit. What happens is over their career, they end up becoming a jack of all trades and a master of nothing, and they can't even see it happening. They often think that 80% was mastery. Because you're so smart, you're so intelligent, you're usually always right. You have this huge blind spot. that you have absolutely no idea that you have, and you've probably never met anyone smart enough or emotionally intelligent and aware enough, and maybe someone who doesn't even give a fuck enough to point this out to you. So you don't even know there's this huge ceiling of potential that is completely unfulfilled above you, because you view, it's really ironic actually, you view that work to get above you as beneath you. So you never even do it because you're always right all the time. So it's like this self-fulfilling blind spot, okay? And this is a really funny just stimulus tell, just because I've been around so many slow and high rate of learners. The stimulus tell of your high rate of learner is often you have 50 tabs open, you have 3 different monitors, you'll be playing chess on your phone while you're also listening to a podcast in between doing work. You can't sit down and read a book for 2 or 3 hours because it's incredibly boring. Whereas the slow rate of learner, someone more like me, we like to have 1 tab open, we like to do 1 task. I really can't even listen to music while I'm working because it's too much stimulus for me. It gets overwhelming and I find the quality of my work deteriorating. Okay, cool. So let me go back to this. I just want to touch on this one more time because this is really, really key. If you're a high rate of learner and you find yourself getting 8% good at something, you will max out and you will never become a master and you will never really fulfill your potential, because when you hit that 8% cap, the work that's required to go from 80% to 100% is sitting down and doing all these things. For example, sales. You may learn how to get 80% good at closing a deal or sales like this. But to become a master, to master the intro, to master the tonality, to master the ejection handling, to master the discovery, you have to master the fundamentals to a level that's so deep, you cannot do it based purely just on genetic skills. You have to diligently study. You have to do call reviews again and again. You have to analyze your own calls and look at what you're genetically doing that's great off the top, but then what are the small gaps that the master does that you do not do? And that requires a level of attention to detail and repetition and focus on boring repetitive tasks that you've never done before and you are actively genetically designed to want to avoid because it feels like dumb people work that you've never had to do. So it's really important that you recognize this. Okay, the other costs of high rate of learners, because you guys have, and I'll kind of put it down here, you have a higher ceiling, so you have a wider variance to be even better, but you also have a longer list of downsides than the slower rate of learner. So think about over here on the slow rate of learning, the variance of being really great or really bad is kind of like this, but on the high rate of learning side, it's a wider variance. So ego, chaos, and the coldness tax. So the ego, and this is not for everyone, I'm just trying to point out everything I can. You're typically the smartest person in the room and you always know it. So you can be a bit of a condescending dick, okay? So you like to say, I told you so. You typically have low empathy for stupider people and you're usually very logical and communicate based on logic, and you get frustrated with people who are very emotional. So people kind of view you as a bit of a dick. Also, I found that high rate of learning people also is just a little bit sloppy and they're also just a little bit chaotic at times. Like you often have a messy desk, your tabs are fucking all over the place, your to-do list is either you don't even have a to-do list, which is really funny and really common, or if you do have a to-do list, it's extremely disorganized, you're not very good at setting priorities. You're also usually not very punctual. So because you don't understand, why would I have to be somewhere early? Like, why would I get somewhere early? Usually you'll show up on the dot or 2 minutes late because you don't understand why you would even need to show up 15 minutes early. It doesn't make sense. And you've never taken a note in your life. So funnily enough, the sales guy that I hired, who was incredibly high rate of learning, who came in and smashed all the sales records for the other people who were still very high performers, but they were slower rate of learners. He didn't even use a sales script. I spent months training the slower rate of learnings meticulously on a sales script. And then I brought him in, he glanced at the script, but then he didn't even use a sales script. And this is really funny when I found this out. He didn't even take notes on the sales call. So he smashed everyone else and he literally didn't use a sales script and he literally didn't even take notes. That's how high rate of learning he was. But he also didn't show up to meetings on time. I had to absolutely roast him and bust my ass to literally get him to show up to a meeting on time. It's just really interesting when you train people. So then when I was interviewing people, I could see sometimes people, they were going to be too high rate of learning. I'm like, look, this guy's going to be, good at the gate, but I'm never going to be able to make him good enough because he's just so high rate of learning. And the same thing with slow rate of learning. Like, this person has amazing attitude, they'd be the best culture fit, but it's going to be such a waste of my time coaching and training them. So a weak culture fit. So people don't want to do their best for someone who talks down to them. So they can be right and still unproductive in a team. So this is why high rate of learners are usually really bad managers. And they have to work their way down to be closer to middle fast, not just fast rate of learning, to actually become good leaders and good managers. Because with super high rate of learners, they're typically the smartest person in the room, and they like letting people know that. And other people don't want to do their best work for high rates of learners, because people don't care if you're right. It's the old cliche, people don't care until they know how much you care. It's why many end up in isolated roles. So engineers, surgeons, mathematicians, because great leaders are usually middle to high, not pure fast. They have the horsepower plus the human element. And they're usually really easy to train at first, but then the hardest to train, which is quite ironic, because past this ceiling, you're teaching them the basic habits they're almost genetically wired to avoid. And not almost, they are genetically wired to avoid it, because why would you spend your time doing repetitive, boring, mundane tasks if you've never had to and you don't think that you need to? And you have such a big genetic blind spot, you don't even see that work as necessary to get to the next level. So here's some piece of advice for you if you're a high rate of learner. This is kind of like the fix, okay? And I love this phrase. I'm gonna be doing a whole video on this shortly, which is reality doesn't care. So I know this because I've had to work closely with many high rate of learners, and I always run into this brick wall with them, which is if you're smart enough to argue why you're right while still losing, okay? If you're not getting the outcome, you're wrong. Reality doesn't care if you think that you're right or not. Okay, let me say that again. If you're smart enough to argue why you're right, why you're doing the right thing, why this is the way things should happen, but you're still losing, aka you're still not getting the outcome that you want, then you have to fucking swallow the pill and admit that it doesn't matter how right you are, you're wrong. Because reality doesn't give a shit what you think. You're not getting the outcome, dude, so it ain't the thing that needs to be done. So you have to lean into the gift first. You have to chase the most complex problems, be the genetic beast, but know the cap is coming. So max out, dude. Like for the sales rep, I ended up screwing him up actually, because I tried to force him too much into using a script and being a slow rate of learner, and it actually fucked with his stats. But then eventually I came to realize, hey, I just need to let him be him and be the genetic freak, but then slowly work on small things that will help him over time to get better and minimize the downsides. Then do what your wiring screams against. So the boring repetition, the fundamentals, taking the notes, the reps that take you from 80 to 100 on one thing. And the fast learner who masters the slow learner skill set is actually the most dangerous person alive, but almost none of them ever do it. It's much easier for a slow rate of learner to move up this bar chart than it is for a fast rate of learner to come down. So what's the sweet spot, okay? I wouldn't say there's like anyone's right or wrong, but what I would say is the best people I have ever trained sit in the middle to high sections. So the slow learners climb up and the fast learners come down to master the boring. So middle raters have enough horsepower for complex problems, plus they have the consistency, the humility, and the repetition muscles. Over time, they go from slow middle to middle high, and they have the upside of everything and the downside of basically nothing. Fast learners almost never fix their deficits because there's no desperate need, so it never happens. So they kind of stay capped by default. I know very few fast rate of learners who have come down, to be honest. Usually once they're a fast rate of learner, they're almost at their peak max. They may get a little bit better and a little bit smarter at what they do, but it's very difficult for them to come down. Whereas for slow and middle rate of learners, it's a much more natural thing for them to move up. It just takes longer. Now, the only ceiling for people who are middle high is you're never going to be Musk level smart, but you typically don't need to hit your goals. So the goal for everyone is from both ends, converge on middle high. This is kind of where you want to get to. So there's 3 moves. These are the actionable tips for you from this video. This is the playbook. Is number 1, you want to locate yourself on the gradient. What's true, not what flatters you. And typically, I'm going to tell you, if you're a slow rate of learner, you're typically going to bias yourself to be probably a lot higher than you actually are. You're probably a lot slower than you really think that you are. And if you're a fast rate of learner, you're probably going to identify yourself pretty accurately as a fast rate of learner, but then your blind spot is you won't admit to yourself that you're really bad at all the slow rate of learning skills, and you won't ever address them. You would just keep chasing different 0 to 80% kind of charts for that mental stimulus, and you'll avoid doing the boring work. So the number 2 is you want to maximize your type's strengths first. So it's the closest win, and it protects you from the fatal downside without upside position. And then after that, you want to deliberately train the opposite end. So slow learners learn how to learn fast, and fast learners learn how to grind. And then you also want to do this for your team too, because it changes how you hire, how you train, and how you promote them, because you need to train and coach these people in different ways based on their personality type. So find your spot, maximize your strengths, then train the other end. If you enjoyed this video, comment what you learned, subscribe so you don't miss the next one, and I'll see you in the next video. Peace.